RPG. This is for a tabletop gaming system. It is not a stream about a table or for a tabletop game per se, but I will be going over some of the real rules and the ins and outs of my personal favorite RPG system, the Hero system. Some of you may know it as Champions. I, in fact, may speak of it as Champions. I am also using the Hero Designer 6 software to design characters and to work with the system. I recommend both very much. The Hero Designer software takes a lot of the crunchiness, the math that is extensive in the Hero system, out of the way and helps you get through that. So keep that in mind if you get interested in the system by what you see, which I hope you will. And look at getting Hero Designer 6 when you get the Hero system at all. They do fit well to very nicely together. That said, tonight I would like to look at how you build bases and vehicles with the Hero system. And the first point that needs to be made is of course, where do you get the points to buy a base or a vehicle? Generally speaking, these are all things that are tied or associated with a particular character. So the answer to that is, and we'll go ahead and build a new character. We'll make it superheroic since they're usually the ones that are worried about bases and vehicles. Also, the fact that in a heroic level setting, basic equipment can be bought with money, whereas at a superheroic level, everything, your base, your vehicles, handgun if you want to carry it, all have to be purchased with character points. So here we have a character, and if it's a superhero character, it should have those point bases. And where you get by, where the points for a base or vehicle come from, is of course a character. And under the perks tab, we have one of the perks is vehicles and bases. And, a lot of this seems self-evident when you really get into it, but hey, Wonder Goon, glad you could show up and join us. But as I was saying, the points come from the character. How many points? Well, let's say we wanted a 200 base. The base points, you figure them into the character. The character plays 40 points for a 200 point base. In other words, for every 5 points that the base has to spend, or the vehicle, the player character or the character must spend 1. So it's a pretty good deal there. You're getting 5 character points to spend on your base or vehicle for 1 character point. So that said, there we go. We can also add in disadvantages, because bases and vehicles can have disadvantages, and if you notice, it didn't change the active points or the real cost. Now, there are modifiers that can be done on the base, but to be honest, I've never seen them used, because certain things like focus, unless the vehicle requires the focus to be used or something like that, or the base, you have to have this focus to get into it, it's really not appropriate to have these limitations on them, and most of the advantages aren't really appropriate either. So in general, you're going to pay this point cost straight up, and that's fine. So there we've got 200 points worth of base to buy our base or vehicle, and it costs us 40 points. This brings up the point that in superheroes, at least, which is again where most of this is going to come into play, GMs can choose to allow players to pool their points, so that each player in the team contributes, say, 5 character points to the base, which gives the base or vehicle 25 character points. And then they all can use the base, and they can all use the vehicle, and such as that. And this is something you see quite often among superhero teams in the literature, the comic books that we all love and are trying to emulate here. So that's where you get your points to spend on a base or vehicle. That said, let's look at building one. And let's start with vehicles. And I'm going to make up a couple. I don't know how many points they're going to take, so I'm going to just go ahead and put an amount here. But the first vehicle I'm going to make is going to be a simple one, a motorcycle. So let's look at characteristics first. And you will notice, if you've seen any of my other videos, streams, I guess I should say, that there's a different set of characteristics here. For instance, their size. Starts out at 1 game inch length, half a game inch width, half a game inch is the area, and a game inch is, by the way, because the game is supposed to be played on a hex grid sheet, with each hex being 1 inch in diameter. And what that means is that 1 game inch equals 2 meters of actual space. So going with building a motorcycle, like I was wanting to, we can leave it at size 0. But if we increased it to 1, you see that our length, our width, our area, and our mass all came up, and we also gained 1 inch of knockback resistance. In this system, you can be knocked back, just like in the comic books and the movies. You get hit with an attack, you're blown backwards, right? So what this does is it takes away 1 game inch, 2 meters of that knockback effect for this vehicle. And as we go on up in size, we are up to, at size 4, 1.6 ton, so about pickup size. So that said, we also need to look at the cost. For 1 point of size, it costs you 5 of your character points. So we're going to leave that alone because, again, I'm building a motorcycle. All right. The vehicle also has the characteristics of strength, dexterity, and body, and defense and speed, and then we get into the movement powers. Strength, of course, determines how much the vehicle can lift, how much it can move with. So, we're going to up that to about 15, which, if I'm thinking correctly, gets us up to about 200 kilograms that you can lift. So 200 kilograms would be about 400 pounds, so that's about right for a motorcycle. Dexterity is just that, dex. Motorcycles are usually pretty nimble and quick, though, so agile, so we'll boost that up to about 20. And their body, though, they don't have a whole lot to them. Let's face facts. I'm a rider myself and can tell you that there's not a lot to them. You get in a fairly minor accident with a motorcycle, you've done significant damage to the body. So we're going to leave the body at 10. We're going to leave the defense at 2. And the speed at 3 sounds about right. Most motorcycles, the normal human speed maxima, I'll get into what speed is in a second. Normal human speed maxima is 4, and the average is 2. So this is a little more higher speed than the average human is going to have. And that sounds about right. What the speed is the number of actions you have in a turn. The turns are 12 seconds long. They're divided up into 12 1-second long segments. And so the speed determines which of those segments you go on. They're called phases then, and how many of them you have. So that's how many actions you get in that 12-second turn. So with a speed of 3, it goes on 4, 8, and 12. Those are the segments, the phases it goes on. And it's already going to be faster than the average human. Well, how does that work? Well, you go by the slower of the two. So, basically the motorcycle in this case would be able to maneuver and handle better than the average rider is going to be able to deal with. So that's where that comes in. Now, 6 inches of ground movement. Does that sound about right? Well, let's think about that. 6 inches, again, is each inch is 2 meters. So that's 12 meters. It gets that per action. So that's going to be in one turn 12 times 3, which is 36. Divide again by 12, we get 3 meters per second. That's pretty slow. Now keep in mind that it does get times 2 that it can go non-combat, but that reduces the OCV of the vehicle to 0 and halves its DCV, its offensive combat value, OCV, and its defensive combat value, DCV. OCV is how easy it is for you to hit a target, and DCV is how easy it is for them to hit you. So, 3 meters per second, we're talking, let's see, about 9 feet a second. 60 miles per hour is 88 feet per second. So this is actually pretty slow at the moment. So we're going to beef that up. Let me think. With 10 to it, that'd be 30 meters per second. Yeah, that's getting pretty close to what, so that boosts it up to 60 non-combat. And we'll fix that in a little bit. So that's about right. That's about where it should be, because 30 meters per second, or roughly, not 30 meters per second. I'm losing my mind. Anyway, that's about right. Swimming, we can go ahead and sell that back, because most motorcycles cannot swim. Most vehicles cannot leap, and so we'll give that all right too. I mean, they can jump with a ramp, but they cannot do a leap. Unless you're very strong, you're not bunny hopping the motorcycle. That said, let's come over here to powers and deal with what I was talking about, how we're going to make this motorcycle run when it gets flat out and you can only open up the throttle. And that is, we come here to powers, and where is it? I'm not seeing running for once. Apparently that is removed. Interesting. Ground movement. There it is. They just changed the name on it. We're not going to add any ground movement here, but what we are going to click is this ×4 non-combat. Remember, I mentioned, right when you look under characteristics, they just changed the name to ground movement from running for some reason. So anyway, all movement powers, running, ground movement, leaping, etc., already come built with ×2 non-combat, which, as I said, means that you can go twice the distance, but you've dropped your OCV, your offensive combat value, to 0, and you've halved your DCV. You're no longer worried about dodging and maneuvering so much as just moving. So you can come in here and check this, and now you get ×4 non-combat multiple. And now, coming back over here to characteristics, now this 10 inches of ground movement becomes 40 inches of ground movement if you decide to open it up, throttle, and just move. And so now all of a sudden we're talking about 40 times 3 is 120 inches over a course of a turn. So that's 10 inches per second, or 40 meters per second. And that's moving on. That's starting to get into some serious movement. So that's why I wanted to do that, and why we gave it some ground movement, but all we did with that is the power is changed the non-combat multiple to 4. So this is pretty much a sports motorcycle now. Now then, yes, you can give a vehicle skills. This is more in lines for the large team vehicles where you have laboratories and things like that on board. So it's not really appropriate for our little motorcycle. And sorry, I keep rubbing at my nose. It itches. It's kind of dry down here in the basement for some reason. Alright, you can give it perks. And some of these may make sense at times. Like, you could theoretically give it deep cover. Why? Because maybe you've got some peel off or some color changing paint on it or something. so that you can change its notoriety uh, uh, while you're driving it or something like that. So you could give it deep cover. Uh, this is a superhero genre game we're talking about, so there we go. You can give it a reputation. People know it, and when you're buying it as a perk, it's a good reputation. People recognize the vehicle and say, "Hey, that's so and so's vehicle." So there we go. And you can also even give a vehicle or a base a vehicle. So that's a potential perk. How could you give a vehicle a vehicle? It's got an escape pod or something of that sort. So, you can, in essence, give a vehicle a vehicle. Talents, again, you can, but I don't see many of these talents that make sense for the vehicle to have. For the character piloting the vehicle, sure. Martial arts, again, I don't see the vehicle having martial arts. I can see you, a character, having learned martial arts that can be used with a vehicle, especially a vehicle like a motorcycle. You could kick it around and kick somebody with the back tire and things like that. But the vehicle itself doesn't have that martial art. That's you, the pilot of the vehicle. So pretty much, we're done. Um, you know, um, we do have some defense issues. Let's see, are they handled? Yes. One of its disadvantages being a motorcycle is honestly that its defense does not cover the driver. Okay? Normally, you're sitting inside of a vehicle, right? So this 2 defense, which is resistant, which means it'll stop killing attacks, bullets. Um, exactly. You can get shot off of it easily. So normally, this 2 defense would protect the driver of a vehicle or the passengers in a vehicle. But in the case of this particular type of vehicle, that's not the case. So that's a disadvantage. So you can sit there and come up with, obviously you're not going to give it any psychological disadvantages, but you can give it a negative reputation. People know it. This could be like Ghost Rider's motorcycle, which people know and recognize and are terrified of. So use your imagination here on this, but in the end, we've spent 46 points of the 225 that I gave it. So you can essentially get, for 10 character points, access to a motorcycle. And as I mentioned, in a superhero game, you have usually around 350 points to spend. Potentially less, potentially more. Depends on the game master, the GM, and it depends on what they might want to do and what type of campaign they're running. So there's buying a basic, straight up vehicle that doesn't do a whole lot. So let's change. Sorry. Let's go through and delete some of this, and let's make a bigger vehicle. Let's make something more along the lines of, let's say, a jet. All right. So a jet right off the bat is going to have a bigger size, and in fact, we're going to give it a size 5. This will make it, well, let's make it bigger than that even. Length is now up to 10 meters. That sounds about right. So we're going to make it a size 7 vehicle. If you notice, in buying its size, its strength went up to 45. I didn't notice that the first time. Its body also went up by 7 points just from buying the size. So the size increases its strength, the size increases its body. It does not, however, increase its dex or any of the other stats. So that said, we're going to leave its dex at about 20. We're going to make it pretty nimble. We're going to leave its speed at about 3. I'm going to up its defense though because this is a superhero's jet, right? To 5. I'm actually going to leave its ground movement the same. I'm going to leave its swimming and leaping at 0. Where we do have to come in now though is come down here when we find that power, because most jets can fly. So we're going to give it, I'm going to say about 20 inches of flight, because it's got to get up and get moving and get going. I am still going to add the ×4 non-combat multiplier on that flight. So when you decide you're no longer in combat and you're no longer interested in dodging and weaving and trying to keep the guns off of you, you just want to get out of there, you can raise that even further. So there's ×8 non-combat multiplier. In fact, I think I'll do that. So bam. You can, there's an important point, thank you, before I get into what I was going to do and say, vehicle movement does not cost endurance. This flight would normally cost 4 endurance for a character that bought this level of flight. So let's look at modifiers though. Are there anything that we need on the advantages? We could make it no turn mode. The turn mode means you have to fly a certain different distance or move a certain distance before you can turn one hex phase, and then you got to fly that distance again before you can turn another one. So you have a distance you have to go around, and you can only close that circle and circle around so quickly. And so you could make it no turn mode, in which case you could just sit there and spin right back around. For a jet, that usually doesn't make sense. For something like maybe a helicopter, maybe, but yeah. Then there's this thing, non-combat acceleration and deceleration. With disadvantages, character may accelerate or decelerate at the rate of his equal to his full inches of non-combat per hex, and thus can reach his full velocity in one full phase in 1 hex of space. Normally, pardon me a moment, normally you can only accelerate or decelerate at your combat speed per phase. So what that advantage allows you to do is you can now do it, do that acceleration per hex, and so in one phase you can be going full tilt, and that's a pretty big advantage. We won't do that. Let's see, on the limitation side though, we can do limited maneuverability, which is just what it says. You've got an even bigger turn mode, you've got even more time that you can take just to have to maneuver around. What the hell? So that's something to do. You can make it fuel dependent, which is appropriate for a lot of vehicles that you have to burn fuel. So signifies the power uses up some sort of fuel, which it uses up and must periodically replenish. So that makes sense actually. So we'll select that. It's not a terribly, or it can't be, it can be a fairly significant limitation, as it starts out with the must refuel once per minute. Minute is 5 turns, 5 times 12, right? So, that would be burning through it pretty quickly. But when you drop it down to must refuel every 6 hours, it's not that much of a limitation. It's still pretty stout, but we'll go ahead and put that on there. So, the other thing is usually flying requires wings, but those wings are usually fairly well attached, so we're going to make it on a, actually, we're going to go ahead and make it obvious accessible, because people can blow holes in those wings too. And so the wings can't just be ripped off generally, except this is superheroes, so yes, they can. But they can have all kinds of holes blown in them. But that brings in that they should be breakable, but we'll give them durable, we'll give them some defense. And the mobility is bulky, you can't just rip off the wings and go flying yourself. And so, bam. And so now instead of 50 points, This flight only cost 15, and that's a pretty solid flight. Um, 20 game inches or 40 meters times 8. Um, Restrainable would be more appropriate. Wondergoon asks if restrainable would be a more appropriate limitation. Let's bring that one up, and because it's a good question. So restrainable, a power with this limitation is generated by or based upon an area of the body which can be restrained. So the bottom line, that would be more if the wings could be grabbed or tied up, the plane couldn't fly. So a helicopter, the rotor is restrainable. The wings and engines on a plane are not. They are still foci, but they are not restrainable. But again, a VTOL vertical takeoff vehicle would probably have rotors that could be restrained and tied up to keep it from being able to go. So that would be appropriate there, if that makes sense. Okay, so we'll leave that as it is. Again, pretty much we're done because unless we wanted to give it, let's see, where is it? A vehicle and escape pod, which may be reasonable. Given again, this was supposedly for superheroes, or space. It may be reasonable that it has an escape pod of some sort. Or be like Air Force One, you've got a little escape hatch that you can get through. That said, skills and talents are generally not appropriate. So we'll leave those off. And so again, to make a jet, a pretty significant one at that, we've only spent 95 points. So making vehicles, at least, is a pretty straightforward process, and it is not that expensive. I mean, 95 points is only going to cost the player on his character, what is it, 95 divided by 5 is 19 points. And he's got a jet that'll get him around the world fairly quickly. So there we have it. Any questions, comments, dirty looks on this one? If not, I'm going to move on to bases. Okay, I guess I'll take that as a no. So to close it out, we can come up here and close the character. Do we want to save it? No, not really. Okay, and we're back to our root character where I was showing you how to... you're right. Let's go back and look at that. Thank you, Wondergoon. Thank you. It's been so long since I've made a base or a vehicle that I forget about some things. So let's kick back. I don't remember the exact, but I don't remember 100% what I had on this, but I remember a good bit, and I may be proving myself a liar that I do remember. Because Wondergoon brought up a wonderful point, and that is, what about weapons? Can you put weapons on these types of things? And the answer is yes, of course you can. So let me just reconstruct. Not fragile, durable. And bam, there we go. Okay. So how would you do weapons? Well, first I'm going to put in a new separator, and then I'm going to add a new list, and we'll call it weapons. Alright, and so this is superhero, so we're going to assume it's 4 colors. So there's 2 types of attacks, main attacks that you can use. Um, those come in the form of normal attacks like Energy Blast. And what that means is that when you buy a number of dice of Energy Blast, when you make a successful attack, you throw that number of dice, you total them up, and that's the amount of stun damage you did. There are two types of damage in the hero system. There's stun and there's body. When you run out of stun, you're knocked unconscious. When you run out of body, you're dead. So for an Energy Blast, a normal attack, the total of the dice is the amount of stun damage done, and there's this complicated system. Okay, for every one that came up, you do no body. For every 6 you came up, you do 2 body, and for everything 2 through 5, you do 1 body. There's a neat little way of double counting that so that you can actually total it up really quickly and easily. It's less complicated than what it sounds like when you've seen it, and maybe that'll be one of my videos actually doing damage. But those are normal attacks. There are also killing attacks. Now, killing attacks, the total of the dice that are rolled is the amount of body that is done. Then you roll another dice, die 6, subtract 1, and multiply that by the total, and that's the amount of stun that is done. Now, the other problem with killing attacks is if you do not have resistant defense, there are two types of defense, non-resistant and resistant. If all you have is non-resistant defense, you have no defense against a killing attack. 0. Absolutely none. They are meant to do exactly what they say, to kill. So with that in mind, and this being 4-color superheroes, we're going to stick with the weapons that are non-lethal. And we're going to have a blaster on it. And we're going to make it around, let's say, usually a good campaign limit is around 12 die 6 for superheroes. I think Wonder going to agree with me. And now we'll put in some advantages. Like, I don't like running out of ammo, so we're going to make it 0 endurance. And we're going to drop the dice down a little bit in a minute because that put us active points up to 90. You could make them armor piercing or penetrating. Let's see. I don't see armor piercing on there. Here's semi-armor piercing. Anyway, armor piercing halves the amount of defenses that a target has. Penetrating, you do at least one of the majority damage, the major damage, the dice total damage. You do at least one of those per die. So let's say we leave this Energy Blast at 12. If I made it 12 die 6, if I made it penetrating, it would do at least 12 stun. Because the total of the dice is stun, there's 12 dice, you would do at least 12 stun with the penetrating attack. We're not going to do anything like that. And Wonder Goon does agree with me, 12 die 6 or 12 damage classes is a good limit. Could make this stun only. In fact, let's why though is that Oh, because there's less chance. That's why it's an advantage. There's less chance that you'll kill somebody. And so it's under advantages that you do stun only. But let's put that on there. And limitations. Let's not make it beam. Beam would mean that it has to attack at full force. So full 12 die 6. You can't scale it back any. And it means you can't spread it and hit multiple targets or bounce it around and ricochet it to do a trick shot and hit somebody. We will make it a focus again. We will call them obvious and inaccessible because they will be inside the vehicle. So they'll be covered by its defenses. And I think that will do. Now, the reason I said I may lower the dice here is because the active points is now 90, which technically means it's a higher damage class attack than what we started out with. because 12-6 would be a damage class. Oh, shoot. It's been so long since I've done this. Anyway, so we're going to bring it down, try to bring it down to the more common maximum, which would be 60 active points, which is 12 damage classes. And the real cost is going to be 30 active points. Real points. Active points are a measure of how potent a power is, and real cost is what it actually costs in character points. Now, some GMs allow this. We could move it up, and for an additional 5 points per, we get to add another quantity of that. So we'll give this thing 2 blasters in case one is damaged in some way. 18 damage classes. Thank you, Wonder Gun. 90 active points would be 18 damage classes, which is usually excessive for the starting, at least in most people's games, and actually it's above the cap for a lot of people's games. Period. So we'll let that. We got a blaster. Yep. And I was just blanking out. 1 damage class equals 5 active points, and I was just blanking out on my math ability. We're also going to give it an entangle. And we'll call this a net gun. Now, entangle is a neat little power. It immobilizes your target. And the total of the die 6 gives the entangle an amount of body that it has. And for each die, it has a resistant defense. A 1 level of resistant defense. So, bottom line, you're wrapping somebody up in a net. They now have to fight to break free of it to be able to act. And so that can be rather nice. You can also do such adders as we can add 1 defense, plus 1 defense. We can make it stop senses so you can't see through it or hear through it or what have you. And just such things as that. We can have it where it builds a wall. But there's a limit. You can only get to double the number of dice in defense. So that's why I couldn't add any more defense on this. But let's give this the 5 die 6, which gives us our 12 damage classes. And we're going to set this as having charges. In other words, it can only be fired a certain number of times before it's simply out of nets. And so we'll do that. And we can do something like have clips. And so somebody can go up and recharge the gun. Guns are nice that way, right? And we'll make it an obvious inaccessible focus, an OIF again, because it is covered under the plane's defenses. And so there we go. And now it'll blow out this nice 5 die 6, where the total of the dice is the amount of body the entangle has, and 7 defense entangle. So your normal average human is going to stay right where you entangle them with this. But your average superhero is probably going to break out, but it'll delay them for a little bit. So that's a good thing sometimes too. You just want to delay them. You don't necessarily need them, stopped just yet. All right, so we've given this jet now 2 nice weapons. And we're still only at 151 points. But I think now you begin to understand why we would probably want to allow teams to pool their points and buy into things like this. We can, of course, set disadvantages on this, like hunted, of more powerful, capture, U.S. military. And so you can give the vehicle some hunteds, people who are looking out for it and want to capture it. They don't care about you, the rider. They want the vehicle. And so this is how you fill in these disadvantage points. And again, it's a matter of using your imagination, coming up with something, and then working it out with your GM, giving some give and take there. But that's what the system is about. You can do almost anything. In fact, I've thought of very few things that you can't do with it. Um, but sometimes it takes some give and take between you and your game master. And Lendergoon says they want the vehicle and all that wonderful superhero technology. Exactly. They want to know what these supers are capable of and why their jets can fly faster and hit harder and shoot more often. They would love to have an infinite energy, infinite shot blaster cannon that they could put on their jets, right? So this can be thing. You can also put unlock on it, and how does that work? Machines often have gremlins, right? Things just constantly seem to be going wrong, so that would be unluck. So don't limit yourself and go, and but I don't want to do something that'll potentially have my vehicle not do what I want it to do. Well, that's the whole point of disadvantages. A disadvantage that doesn't disadvantage you in some way isn't worth any points. So it's got to be glitchy. It's 1 die 6 good luck. Maybe you go out there rushing out there, you need to get somewhere quick, and it won't start. And so you've got to take a few turns to find out what the problem is. Somebody left the hood latch open or something. But the point is that these are fun things that do crop up in the source material, in the comic books, in the movies. Sometimes the heroes are delayed, and that makes a difference. So keep that in mind. And now I think we're done with our vehicle and our tutorials on vehicles. Yes, Wondergoon, any comments or suggestions you might have? Give him a little bit to reply. I can see by my count of viewers on my software over here that he's the one that's watching. So now we're done. So now we'll move on to bases. And with the software, it all starts out the same place. We're creating a character. By the way, I do use 5th edition rules. There is a 6th edition out for Zero System. I don't know that much about it. I haven't looked at it. Maybe someday I will, but for the moment, I'm limited resources like so many of us, and with other factors involved, I'm just not where I can upgrade to 6th edition. All right. That said, bases. Whoa. Now that's a really dramatically different set of characteristics, isn't it? Only 3. Bottom line, bases are defined by their size, their defense, and their body. Okay? They start out at 0 size, being 4 inches long. Remember, this is game inches, so that's 8 meters by 2 meters. And of course, you can, in reality, change this around to however you want. The bottom line is, though, is that it has an area of 8 X's in the system. So, yeah. It also has this DCV, since there is no dex, that starts at -4. The bottom line is a base is pretty much stationary and is therefore very easy to hit. It's easy to hit the broadside of a barn, right? So let's jack this size up a little bit. And as you see, our DCV just goes down from where it was. Our defenses, defenses again for a base is resistant, so you don't have to worry about those killing attacks. And we'll jazz up its defense some. Be careful with that, because you can inadvertently give it the defenses of a super tank. Keep in mind that a 44 Magnum in this game is a 2-die-6 killing attack. So if you have, in short, which is the most powerful of the handguns that I've seen statted, If you go up to like a 15 defense on a building or something, you have in essence made it bulletproof. Because the most powerful handgun cannot penetrate it. Yes, you can still penetrate it with things like bazookas and missiles and so forth and so on, but unless you're building a bunker, this is why I say be careful just how high you set your defenses. Bottom line, you're making it where it can't be penetrated. Well, that's what I want. Now, what fun is that? Part of the fun is having the villains occasionally storm your base. Yeah, I'm crazy that way. I actually think that's fun. It's part of the literature. It's part of being a superhero that you've got to defend this place. Okay. Same with the body. You got to be careful. And keep in mind that for the base, this is both the interior and exterior walls and the roof that have this body in defense. So, again, you don't want to be careful with just how much you put in. Now, then we move on to skills. Skills are something you might want to look into in the base. You have a gymnasium in there, it probably has acrobatics. Okay? The bottom line is you can put skills in the base and they act as complementary skills to someone trying to do that in the proper place in the base. So if you have a gymnasium that the characters can come in and use, then you need an acrobatic skill in the base. And the bottom line, well, what use would that be? Well, it's quite good for training purposes to justify your skills buy-ups on your characters and things like that. So, yeah. So, let's see. Wonder Goon, true Viper agents can and will get into your secret bunker and steal your computer files. It's happened several times in my campaign, CSE included. Yes, indeed. Bottom line, the bad guys get into your base. Period. Sooner or later, it's going to happen. So, trying to build an impregnable fortress is kind of ridiculous and silly, and it makes it where the game is no fun. So, these are some of the stories that come up to make it a fun and entertaining game. So don't try to make your characters or your bases or anything like this indestructible and invulnerable. Come on, have some fun with it. You could give your base acting. And what this means is it has a store of costumes. Well, that would be disguise. But it has a stage and probably books and tutorials on how to act and everything. But we'll leave that off. We didn't make this terribly big base, but we'll have a gymnasium in there. You could give it armor smithing, and it has the equipment needed to smith your armor. Let's see. What's another good one here? You can give it concealment. This comes in two ways. The bottom line is a base looks like a base. People that drive by are going to go, oh, hey, that's a base. If you don't want that happening, you want your base to be concealed. And so you have to give it some concealment. And you've noticed that they all start with 9-. Well, that's read 9 or less. Hero system operates on a 3-6 system. So for most of these skill rolls and everything, you roll 3-6 and you're rolling low. You're rolling 9 or less. Okay? So the total of the dice needs to be 9 or less. So that's still a pretty obvious base. But we can sit here and for 2 more character points per plus, we can give it a +1. And so instead of 3 points, we gave it +5 to its roll and made it 14 or less. And so now most people are going to drive by and not be impressed. They're not going to realize, hey, that's a base. I agree with Wonder Goon, so let's go ahead and give it a medical bay. So that would be paramedics down here. And we might also need to give it, let's see, where is it? A science skill of, medicine. And we might want to give it a professional skill. Oh, yes. A professional skill of doctor. What this allows is that these now become complementary roles again to someone who brings in a patient and starts trying to stabilize them or otherwise heal them in some way. Now that the base is equipped essentially with these the chemicals and criteria and pharmaceuticals that are needed to act as a doctor and to practice medicine as well as paramedics. With that said, we probably want to boost that paramedics a little bit. Um, you know, some people would just say, well, the paramedics should have been enough. Uh, there's a little bit more. Paramedics will have the first aid kit there. Okay, maybe a little more than that. So paramedics is just straight up, here, slap a band-aid on it. Here, we got the stuff we need for a tourniquet. You want to actually do medicine on them, you're going to need this other stuff. Oh, by the way, every one of these labs or gyms or medical bays or so whatever have to take up at least one hex, 1 game inch inside our base's size over here. So you've got to keep that in mind as well. All right, and then here would be a fun thing to give a base. We could give it an interrogation. And then now the bottom line, it's got a torture chamber. And in this case, with a full medical bay, you might want to add some Waldo arms using extra limbs so that the base can... Yeah, exactly. So what he's talking about is if the base can actually assist you, then we probably want to give it some extra limbs so it's got some arms that it can sit here and manipulate things with. And that may bring up that we want to give the base a follower. A follower, you again pay 1 character point per 5 character points you get in the follower. And disadvantages don't count against that. And the bottom line is now I can make a computer or an AI that inhabits the base and manipulates those arms for you. And so that was my previous stream, was how to do a computer or AI. So if you're interested in that, I'm not going to go through that again. There's already a video about it, so go look that one up. And but yes, you can put these into the bases. You can put weapons in the base. And so we come back to our good old trusty Energy Blast, and we run up an 8 dice Energy Blast. We're going to make it reduced endurance to 0 endurance. We're going to make it obvious inaccessible foci, because they can see the guns. And we'll make it durable. We're going to make them bulky, because they can't be just picked up by somebody and turned on and used. And we're going to put 8 of them in there. And so for 45 points worth, we've got now 8 dice 6. And this is something that the computer or the AI that you put in to run our medical bay may be able to access and use too. And so here's how we do all kinds of equipment and so forth. And you know, you can come in here and on characteristics. Where is that tab? Characteristics. You can buy some defense. Let's buy 10 more defense. We're going to add modifier. We're going to put the limitation limited coverage on it. That's not that this is the limitation we're wanting. Partial coverage. That's the one I'm wanting. And so we can sit here and set a certain number of hexes that are covered. 10 hexes. And now we've got some nice security vaults where we can put our nefarious miscreants that we've captured and lock them away. And now they've got to be able to blast through an additional 10 defense. So with the bases, that's up to 16. So now we're pretty much getting to where we're talking about they have to be, capable of putting out the power of a bazooka or something to break through just to break the defense, and we can add some body and do the same thing. So let's add 10 more body. Make it also partial coverage. We made it 10 hexes. And so again, now we've got some jail cells that we can have set up. You can also give these cells some other defensive powers like mental defense and power defense so that other types of powers can't be operated through them either. So that characters can't teleport out of these cells. So this is how you do all of this sort of thing. Some other things that you have to worry about with bases is you have grounds. Normally you have grounds that are the size of the base. You can add that to double or quadruple the size of the grounds so that it's got a nice area around it. That's okay. Then you can add and change the location. It is always assumed that your base is in the middle of a big city. You can change it to suburb for 5 points or make it distant from the city for 10. What this happens is this is the location sets up that it's more remote. It's harder to get to. It's harder to assault. It's harder to find. Whereas when it's in the city, there you go. There's also modifiers for it to be floating in water, deep in the wilderness, airborne, underwater, underground, in space, or in another dimension. I will note, however, that if you put it in another dimension, you must remember that you must somehow be able to get to that dimension and from that dimension, or otherwise your adventures are going to be very limited to, or your access to your own base is going to be very limited. So keep that in mind. You can also get some disadvantages for the location. Is it difficult to defend where it's at? Is it an average location? Is it easily defensible? So, if it's on the top of one of those nice rocky spires like you see out in the desert southwest, that would be an easily defended location. So, you're going to have to pay some points for that. So, these are the types of things that you can do and that you'll need to consider when building a base. Dang my nose. The base can also have access to advanced technology. So in the end, some of these perks become very much important for bases, whereas they weren't so much for vehicles and so forth. So there we go. And once again, I will ask, are there any comments or questions? Because I think we've hit on most of the thing. Oh, by the way, talents can be in a base. Generally speaking, talents are for superheroic characters, though. You're probably better off building them as powers for a superheroic base. But technically, unless the GM says no, there's nothing that says you couldn't give your base Berserk Fury. Chances are you'd need like a computer or AI that was running it, but it could freak out, So Rondergroon is saying there's no questions from him. So if there's not, I'm going to close all these things out. I think we've had a good discussion of where you get your points to buy your base and vehicles. I will note that I've only had GM'd one player that did a base, and he did it on a remote island within San Francisco, so it was out in the bay. And I tricked him into calling it the Isla Totalis Dramatis. So yes, his secret base was named Total Drama Island. And But that's the only player I've ever had run do develop their own base uh, in one of my games, and I've only been in one game, and that was one of Wonder Goon's games, where he did allow us to all pool together and collect our points to build a base and to build a vehicle. The vehicle was a point of amusement, which is why I'm telling this story, because basically uh, I'm the one who constructed it, and by the time I got finished, I didn't think anything about it or anything, but I built it, and it was the size. It was a ground vehicle, the size of a train, a locomotive on a the locomotive part of the train. And when asked what to name it, I just shrugged and said Winnie B. Go. So yes, we rode around the streets of Atlanta in a railway train, uh, locomotive-sized Winnebago. So, like I said, kind of an amusing story to put some of this into perspective. Uh, we also had a jet and a nice solid base with that game because we had upwards of at one point how many? Yeah, he just shook his head and rolled with it. Um, but I think upwards of 12 people. I think at the height of that campaign, there was actually 12 characters associated with the game. Not all of us showed up at any one time, thankfully. Um, but there was a lot of points pooled together for this base and for these vehicles. And so if you're doing a superhero game, um, yeah, he's agreeing with me. The max characters was around 12, with all of us contributing anywhere from 5 to 10 points. So, again, you multiply that by 5. Holy cow. We had points coming out our ears on that base. And the vehicles, we just had the two, a jet and the Winnie. So, yeah. So each PC contributed 5 points for the vehicles and 10 points for the base. And I recommend any of you would be GMs out there definitely do that for your superhero teams because it's part of the game. Oh, we did have a helicopter as well. Okay. I don't remember doing that one, but I will take your word for it. You are the one who still has notes. All right. That said, I'm really going to stop and stop reminiscing about games with Wonder Goon. That should be another stream in and of itself. We've been playing for a long time and a long time together. So, with that said, I will bid you all good evening. I hope you got something out of this. I hope you enjoyed watching. And peace and be well.